So welcome back to this first day of this workshop of the Brazilian Network of Citizen Science. This is a type of research that has been gaining more visibility, and this event allows us to talk to national and international specialists to find the principles that will be used in our network. This morning we have the opening, the first panel, and now in the afternoon we are going to start the panel called Technology and Data in Citizen Science. We'll have 4 speakers, national and international renowned specialists connected to this citizen science initiative, discussing tools and technologies, especially new emerging technologies that will help us in advance and broaden citizen science, and also discuss challenges related to the new potentials of citizen data generated by and for citizens. After introducing our speakers, we'll have and their presentations. We'll have a 20-minute Q&A, then we'll have a break, and then we'll go back for an open and interactive debate here with the participation of everyone that wishes to send their questions. You can send questions through YouTube and also here at Zoom. We have a team collecting these questions, and they will all be brought to us. The English and Portuguese are the languages of the event. So we have, for those who are in YouTube, we have different broadcasts, English and Portuguese, and here the translation can be accessed through the globe in your toolbar at the bottom of your screen. So I want to thank all of our guests that kindly accepted to participate and to contribute with this event here in Brazil. So first of all, I want to introduce Kate Bailey from Anecdata. Kate is co-founder and development leader of Anecdata.org. It's an online, free of charge platform to collect and share observations on citizen science. So this is all to improve the interoperability and interaction between projects, and also to provide access to marginalized communities and citizens. So I thank you for your presence here in this panel, and I pass you the floor for your presentation.
Kate?
Oh, yes. Oh,
the word is right. A palavra está com você.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Here we go. I'd like to start, wait, hold on. First, I need to start sharing my screen. So let's go back to Zoom, share screen, desktop 1, share, and then we go to PowerPoint, and we're going to play from the start. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Kate Bailey. I'm the systems developer at the MDI Biological Laboratory, where I've been for the last 8 years. And my work at the laboratory is largely around developing Anecdata.org, which is an online platform for citizen science projects all around the world to use for their own purposes. So this platform originally began as part of our own work out of the community lab at the MDI Biological Laboratory. And in our laboratory, we do a lot of work with local stakeholder groups and schools and various volunteers monitoring the environment. So for example, we do water quality monitoring, we do phytoplankton monitoring, and we also have been tracking the status of eelgrass, which is a underwater flowering plant that grows along the coast of Maine. That's very important for our local fisheries because it protects young fish. And but Anecdata's beginnings actually owe owe themselves to eelgrass, because in the spring and the summer of 2013, we found that eelgrass was disappearing up and down the coast of Maine, and we didn't know how extensive this problem was. I built a quick website to collect those data, and in the fall, we realized that we needed a more extensive platform to handle all of our data, because we had so many organizations contacting us and asking us for our data, and we needed to collect data from volunteers. And so I began work on a platform that would allow us to collect data from volunteers and allow anybody to get data back out. And over the next couple of years, we started opening Anecdata.
E nos últimos anos, abrimos o Anecdata para outras organizações.
And today, Anecdata is home to almost 10,000 users and over 200 projects across the state, across the entire world. We've collected 32,000 photographs and 57,000 different observations. So the cool thing about Anecdata is that we try to make it as easy to use as possible, while also allowing people to gather a wide range of data. So while some platforms, for example, Inaturalist, are very centered on collecting one kind of data, for example, species observations, we want Anecdata to serve organizations who need to gather a wide range of data and provide them with the tools to do that. So we try to make it as easy as possible to start a project, as easy as possible to get the data back out through a CSV download. We make this available on the web and also through a mobile app. And also, it's not just a data collection platform. Anecdata is also, to some extent, a social network. We have communications tools on there for chatting and for having group conversations inside of a project. And you can also comment and like other participants' observations. And we find that actually helps drive further participation in projects, because people feel that their participation is appreciated. So yeah, the Anecdata app, you don't need to have a cell signal. This is something that will work even in areas where there is no service. You can chat with it, and you can also get push notifications when there's activity in your projects. And so the way Anecdata works is, first of all, people can join the platform, and then they can either set up a project. So they design their project page. They can design the different questions that project participants are asked. They can set up controlled lists of locations where people can share data, or they can just let people share data from anywhere in the world. Or people can also participate in a project. They can share, they can fill out data sheets, they can upload photos, they can just share comments from wherever they are. And all of this goes into a database which is publicly accessible for viewing, commenting, and downloading. So this is what our project pages look like. And you can see here that we have the ability to enter data. You can also view the data. You can join the project forum. And you can also directly message the people who run the project if you have questions about it. So here, for example, we have from one of our projects, we have a system where people collect water samples from their homes, and they register their data sample with us on the website. And then later, after the fact, we use an uploader to upload the lab analysis data from the data sample. And we actually tell people what their what the analytes in their data sample, what they are, and whether they're safe for them to drink or not. And this is used by, this entire system is used by a lot of different projects across the world. It's being used by South Carolina Aquarium, Maine Sea Grant, Massachusetts Audubon, Acadia National Park. And actually we've got a few projects that are being run out of NASA. So for example, here's one project. This is one that we originally developed our mobile app through collaboration with South Carolina Aquarium. And we found that through working with them that we've been able to learn a lot about the needs of projects and also the needs of participants, because they've got a lot of they have a lot of participants who are older, and their insights have been really useful for us in developing the app and making sure that it's as user-friendly as possible. And so through this project, we've actually they've got a project that collects data from volunteers sweeping their beaches for debris, which can be entangling wildlife. And in the course of this project so far, this project has been running for, I believe, 4 years, and they've collected 1.2 million pieces of debris through this project, which is pretty cool. Another project that we've got going on is the CNET project, which collects data on bird entanglements along the eastern coast of the United States. And this project is actually very interesting because it was originally run out of Tufts Veterinary School. And they had their own online portal, which they developed for these data. And what ended up happening was their Information Technology Center told them that this was going to be taken down in a few weeks because there was no more money to support it. They shared their data with us, we uploaded the data, and the project can now live on anecdata.org. And also, I mentioned NASA earlier. We've been finding that this is being used also by school groups that are taking part in NASA's educational programs. So here we've got some projects, for example, Lower the Boom actually accesses internal sensors in mobile phones to record the background noise in different areas of the United States. And they're trying to figure out how quiet can it actually be? Like, how quiet is it in different parts of the country? We've also got Earth Rotation Detector, which actually measures gravitational differences across the world to try to see if the difference in gravity between the poles and the equator can be measured using smartphone sensors. And we found out that's actually true, and you can. And this has also been used for handling data samples. So in this case, this is a project where samples of ants and bees are being taken, and these samples can be are logged into Anecdata using a barcode scanner. So we've been doing a lot accessing samples, accessing sensors on mobile devices. So what we've learned overall when we've been working with Anecdata is that iteration is really, really important. We started off thinking that we would just be developing a simple data portal for our own laboratory. We found out this is a big need across the world, having a versatile platform like that. We also thought it would be just for data. No, communication is really important as well. And just for our mobile app alone, our first version of the app gave us lots of important data, but we realized that we needed to completely redesign the app. And so we've been gathering a lot of data from our users. We've been learning, for example, from the South Carolina Aquarium's litter-free project. That entire project informed the entire app, but it also informed us, for example, collecting the different kinds of data inputs that are needed. You can't just use numbers and text in simple pick lists. Sometimes you just need much more complicated data types. For example, working with the Environmental Research Institute, we learned that we need to also collect more advanced geospatial data. We need our app to work offline. And for the Bioinformatics T3 course, we realized that we needed to be able to scan barcodes. So that's where those features came from. We've also learned that privacy is very important. I went into developing anecdata.org thinking that all data should be open. This is not true. we found that some projects, for example, like the All About Arsenic project, where people collect data from their homes, we need to obscure these locations. And so in this case, what we do is we obscure it. We've added a feature called geoprivacy, which obscures the locations of observations to the nearest 10th of a degree. We also have found that we need to protect the identities of participants in projects sometimes. So in this case, for example, in the All About Arsenic project, we mark observation, all observations come from an account called Anonymous. And as well, we found that some survey questions need to be kept private. And so what we do is we actually obscure those in the public data set. So what's happening now? Well, we're working on the All About Arsenic project. It's in its 3rd year now. And what's going on here? My screen's going off. Excuse me. My computer is going strange. Here we go. And we're also bringing on summer interns this summer who are going to be helping us develop new data visualization features for the platform. With that, we're really excited about building some open source components. And finally, we're also working on translating Anecdata because a lot of people don't speak English, obviously. And so we're crowdsourcing translations for anecdata.org using an online interface that I built. And we can translate the interface into any language in the world, but we're currently for German, Romanian, and Vietnamese, we're at 90%, Polish 80% done. Portuguese is only 30% done. We would love to see some people to see some more support for Portuguese, and 10% for Russian. And so that's it. Thank you all so much for hearing some of our experiences, and we're really excited to see where this all goes in the coming years.
Muito obrigado, Kate. Esse projeto, com certeza, é impactante.
Thank you very much, Kate. Is certainly a very impacting project with impact in the life of many individuals. It will be a very interesting afternoon for discussion, for sure. Now I would like to invite our next speaker, Carrie Seltzer, in the project Inaturalist. Carrie Seltzer is a strategist, engaging strategist in Inaturalist, and she manages the international network of Inaturalists. She has a PhD in ecology and worked in open data as a member of science and technology in the American Society for Advancement of Science. Carrie, thank you very much for accepting our invitation to take part in our meeting today, and you have the floor.
Great, thanks. Is my screen visible?
Sim.
Okay. Thank you very much to the organizers for the invitation, and also to the translators who are making it possible for me to participate as an English speaker today. So I'm going to be sharing some of the lessons that we've learned over the course of developing Inaturalist for, I think, just about 13 years now. And you'll see a lot of parallels between what Kate presented with Anecdata and a lot of the lessons that we've learned from Inaturalist. So it's great to see a great setup, and I'm glad that I'm presenting after Kate. Just to give an overview briefly of what Inaturalist is and how it works. At its core, it's a platform for sharing biodiversity encounters and crowdsourcing the identifications of what people find. Inaturalist is strictly focused on these observations of biodiversity. I wanted to share a little bit about the sort of core unit of interaction on Inaturalist, which is an observation. So when you share an observation on Inaturalist, these are the key pieces of information that we consider a complete record. We need to know who you are, so you need to have an account on Inaturalist. We don't have an anonymous option like Anecdata does. We need to know where you saw it. There are so with coordinates, and we also have a geoprivacy setting. Either you can choose to obscure things or they can be automatically obscured for sensitive species, for example. We need to know when you saw it. And preferably there should be evidence of what you saw. Overwhelmingly, the evidence comes in the form of photographs, but it can also be sound. And then this question of what you saw, and even if you don't know exactly what you saw, the community can help you work that out. And this happens through adding identifications that are all attached to a single tree of life, which allows for both general identifications to be added, such as mammals. If you don't know what kind of animal you saw, but you know it's a mammal, that is a useful starting place and will help other people be able to find your observation and identify it more specifically. So I think one of the fundamental things that needs to be taken into consideration when you're thinking about systems for citizen science and sharing these kinds of records is that they need to be shareable. And I'm going to use an example of something that is not shareable. So if you see a butterfly, you take a picture, and you want to know what it is, right? That photo can be a record, but let's say you go to Facebook to find the answer for what it is. And there's just thousands of groups on Facebook for identifying different organisms. But identifications that are received on Facebook are not fundamentally shareable. Facebook was not designed with data collection in mind. I know there are programs that are using Facebook as a mechanism of data collection, but it's difficult because that's just fundamentally not how Facebook was designed. So in the case of biodiversity records, I think that Inaturalist benefits and other biodiversity programs benefit from being able to build on a lot of existing work about making data more accessible. So this is a helpful way to think about fair data. So is data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable? So this is something we try to follow this for Inaturalist. And like I said, I think that biodiversity has a bit of an advantage because there are such well-developed standards, such as the Darwin Core. And I think it's a little bit trickier when you're looking at other kinds of data collection, but wherever possible, it absolutely makes sense to leverage and build on those existing data standards so that you're not unintentionally inventing a new kind of data standard that will make it more difficult for multiple sources of data to be aggregated down the road. To give an example of how data is shared outward from Inaturalist, there's a couple main paths. One is that you can get data directly from Inaturalist. We have a CSV export tool that puts it out as a spreadsheet. We also have an API, which is a bit more of a tech-savvy way to interact with Inaturalist. But those are probably the two main ways, in addition to exploring on the interface itself, that people interact with Inaturalist data direct from Inaturalist. We also, though, on a regular basis, we share a Darwin Core archive, which uses that Darwin Core standard to share all the data from Inaturalist in this internationally recognized format that makes it easier for other groups to use data from Inaturalist as well. So each week we prepare a Darwin Core archive that is automatically collected by the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, or GBIF. And a lot of Inaturalist data gets used through the context of GBIF. I also wanted to point out one way that we benefit from data being shareable and interoperable is in the context of taxon descriptions in Wikipedia. So rather than having developed descriptions of all of the species represented in Inaturalist, we pull that information in from Wikipedia and a handful of other sources when it's available. And so I think this is a great example of how you can look around at the data landscape and the standard landscape and think about what you can leverage from other groups and organizations versus what you need to build and tackle uniquely for your project. To go back to GBIF, so this is the snapshot of the Inaturalist data that's shared with GBIF. It's a subset. At this point, it's a little bit less than half of the data that we share with GBIF on a regular basis. One of the tremendous benefits that Inaturalist receives from sharing data in this way is being able to take advantage of GBIF's citation tracker. So up in the corner, circled in orange, I've highlighted the number of citations, which is the number of publications that have used at least one record from a data set that they downloaded from GBIF. This actually gives us more insight into what people are doing with Inaturalist data than downloading Inaturalist data directly from Inaturalist. So I think anyone who's collecting any projects collecting biodiversity should be looking at how they can share their data with GBIF so they can get this additional insight and impact from their work. I also think it's really important to ask this question, and Kate touched on this with Anecdata. How are you building community around data? Because ultimately, data by itself kind of doesn't matter. People have to care about that data if they're actually going to act on it. So data needs to be social, and you need to think about these social interactions when you're designing your programs. I always like to acknowledge the Inaturalist community in any of my presentations because Inaturalist wouldn't work without the tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people who have contributed, who have made it part of their daily lives and are just incredibly dedicated to its success and continuation. So huge thanks to the Inaturalist community. I wanted to highlight what has been happening in Brazil. So currently there's more than 500,000 observations recorded from Brazil. They are represent more than 24,000 species and from over 20,000 individuals. I'm in there, I've got 100 or so observations from Brazil from a few years ago. But this just gives you a sense of what the activity from Brazil on Inaturalist is right now. To look at it another way, a more species-centric way, you can see what the top observed and identified species in Brazil are so far. And honestly, it's pretty fascinating to look at this in different countries, but it's cool that spiders are so high up. I didn't look into this, but I wonder if this is driven by a group of spider enthusiasts that are particularly active in Brazil. It's like birds, butterflies and spiders, which is just really fascinating. You have to go really far down to find plants right now. So we need more plant people in this community, apparently. Anyways, this is all available for your exploration. So some concerns that people have about the data from Inaturalist is that there are errors. And I just try to be really frank that yes, there are always mistakes on Inaturalist, but the beauty of having this engaged and active community is that those mistakes can always be corrected by the community. It's not static. And even the snapshot that we share with GBIF every week, we update it every week because it is dynamic, it's growing, and there's always corrections being made. It's always a work in progress, but we've built some tools to make it easier for people to flag not only if there's misidentifications, but if there's other errors. For example, if it's a garden plant that's marked as a wild plant, we want to flag that as not wild. We want people to mark if the location is obviously inaccurate, if the date is obviously inaccurate. Sometimes that happens from camera errors, things like that. And we have other ways to flag these things. So it's important to think about how to build tools for your community to help them curate the data that they care about. It's also really important to have guidelines that keep people safe in when you're encouraging interaction. You know, people are going to be people, and community guidelines are really important. And setting a culture for your project and program is really important. I want to talk a little bit about scale and scalability, and give me a wave if I am running close to my time to make sure that I don't go over. Right now, Inaturalist has almost 60 million observations from every country in the world. More than 300,000 species have been recorded and identified so far. And we've had 3.6 million people create accounts. Now, I usually cut that number about in half, and it's about half of that have ever actually contributed on Inaturalist. But that's a little bit harder for us to easily pull out and measure. So if you go to the homepage, that's the top line number that you'll see. This is still small in terms of social networks, but it's not small in the context of biodiversity data or citizen science broadly. So I want to share a little bit about some of the reasons that I think Inaturalist has scaled. So because Inaturalist covers all species, Inaturalist is a home for both generalists and specialists, and there are real benefits to being able to reach both of those groups at once. It's also been really fascinating to have this global scale because identifications are global and people share expertise across borders when you have a global platform. And so this highlights a few of our really active observers who are based in Asia, in the US, or in Europe. And you can see that they are identifying things all over the world because they have this expertise and this interest that isn't geographically restricted. It's taxonomically focused and globally broad. Another way that Inaturalist has scaled is similar to how Anecdata makes it easy to set up projects for all kinds of things. Inaturalist has project tools that allow folks to create a project. Typically, projects are either sort of species or taxon specific or place-based. And I've pulled up an example of an upcoming effort, which is the City Nature Challenge. There are many cities in Brazil participating. I've pulled out the Sao Paulo one just as an example. So you can create a project on Inaturalist and use Inaturalist's existing infrastructure to encourage people to look for and share certain kinds of observations and really take advantage of everything that's already been built for this. We also crowdsource the translation of the Inaturalist interface. So we use a platform called Crowdin, and Inaturalist has been translated into a few dozen different languages. It is almost completely translated into Brazilian Portuguese, even more fully translated into Portugal Portuguese. So that's really helped it grow as well. And also, and this is a big piece of my responsibility, we've developed formal relationships with organizations in almost 20 countries around the world at this point. We're announcing several more actually over the next few weeks. And so this provides a way for local leadership and connections to help grow the Inaturalist community without segmenting it. So what's important to understand, I'm using Inaturalist Ecuador here as an example. When you go to ecuador.inaturalist.org, you see a focus on Ecuador, Ecuadorian species on the homepage. And when you go to explore the data, by default, you only see the records from Ecuador, but it's very easy to remove that filter for Ecuador. And then you're looking at observations from the whole world. So this is not a separate system only for data from Ecuador. It's sort of a filtered view of all of the observations in the world so that you have a more localized relevant focus without losing that connection and the network benefits and synergy of this global platform. So I just want to end with a few questions that might be food for thought. When you're thinking about building a program to scale and last, you need to find the right scope and scale for the needs and resources. You know, if you're a small program, it's going to be really difficult to create your own platform. And so looking at things that exist is definitely something to consider. I think this question, do you need a technical solution or a social one, is really important. A lot of people go to technical solutions when there may be an acceptable social solution. And again, as I've mentioned, what existing things can you leverage and what do you need to create on your own? And lastly, know your strengths and weaknesses and don't try to be it all or do it all. People email us pretty often and ask, you know, can we use iNaturalist to collect water quality data? And no, you can't unless it's just about the organisms living in that water. And we're not planning to move in that direction. And so we often point people to Anecdata actually for things like that fall outside the scope of iNaturalist. Obrigada. Thank you all.
Muito obrigado, Kerry. Fantástico.
Thank you very much, Katie. Fantastic. They are complementary visions in this moment.
Now I want to invite Reinaldo Guedes of the WikiAves project. He's founder and manager of WikiAves, the largest online database on wild birds in Brazil, the most accessed site, the segment, with more than 35,000 registered users and millions of photos and sounds of Brazilian wild birds. So, Reinaldo, thank you for accepting this invitation. Can you hear me? Thank you. Good afternoon. First of all, thank you for the opportunity of being here, speaking of our work, the WikiAves. And to speak about WikiAves, I'm going to navigate on the website and talk a little bit about the history of the website. Started in 2008 as a hobby, in fact. And as the website grew, as it became more popular and largest, it became an institution and a reference in Brazil for bird watching. And why has WikiAves become a reference? Because when we started, we had a goal of joining several informations that were scattered around the internet, text, photos, and sounds, especially photos and sounds. There were specific websites for photos, other for sounds, and the text was in Wikipedia. So it came to join all of this together and create a database, joining the community of bird watchers around the tool in order to set up a knowledge repository. Today we have more 3.5 million photos, and from this we have 200,000 recordings. And why have we become a reference so fast? The idea was there were people who did not even know they were bird watchers. They had a curiosity, and when they typed in the internet the name of a bird, the objective was to allow them to find a complete database with information of the Brazilian birds. So then came WikiAves, although there's a strong appeal for pictures. One of the main functionalities are the pages for each species. For example, here we have the name of the species, and then you navigate to a page with the complete description of the species with sounds, photos, and also showing each category of photos, the male bird, the young bird, the kind of feed. This is all, this comes all from the pictures sent by our users. Our users provide the pictures, the photos. They are not uploaded automatically. They are uploaded through the users vote. They vote for the best pictures. They categorize these pictures and they fill up the pages. And this ends up the selected picture for these pages. When the user has its photo selected to go into the page, it becomes like an honor. It's a reason of satisfaction for the user, because it's really good to see your photo illustrating the page of the species. So we have, each municipality also has a specific page. So for example, we can navigate to the municipality of São Paulo. This, all of this database is automatically classified. This is used as a reference. The amount of species that we have in a certain municipality. So Wikiavis is a reference in Brazil for the number of species in each municipality. Of course, there are the official registries, but many medias quote from this database. So what's the use of putting together so much information? In the end of each process of user contribution, Wikiavis can share this huge registry and database, and we receive about 1,400 contributions a day, which is very reasonable. And Wikiavis works exclusively with Brazilian birds. We have cases of birds that come from abroad, but this is all that we see observations made in Brazil. And the identification of the species is difficult because we have a high number of species. And this is exactly our work, to screen all the information that arrives, this 1,400 photos that we receive every day. So the classification and the correction of potential errors is hard work for us. So now we are working in the project to include the artificial intelligence step, so that automatically we can help the users to classify the photos and reduce the errors in our database. This has been a long-term project, and the idea is that AI will use, especially new users. Our audience is made up of beginners in this area, and the idea is exactly to bring new users to the community due to the easiness of use and accessibility of the website. And this work of automatic identification through AI will help the newcomers, the ones that are starting now, and will help this community to grow even more. When Wikiavis started, we have only a few bird watchers. Today, we have 37,000 users registered, which is a figure that we celebrate every time that it goes up. And we believe that there is still a lot of potential to increase this number in Brazil. We are the second country in terms of the number of species. We only lose to Colombia. And we have a huge population. And exactly this kind of knowledge is very interesting for our population, and bird watching is a very interesting activity also for us. We have many other features, the list of all Brazilian species, for example. So this list is based on the CBRO, is the Brazilian Committee of Ontologic Registration. And these are the species. We have more than 95% of the species with photos and sounds. So it's a very complete work. Here is where we can see this classification and have an idea of all species that we have in the country. The work of including and classifying leads to the final result, which is making this data available for science. The bird watcher is, first of all, a citizen scientist. So Wikiavis has this role of providing data for citizen science. And we have been doing that along the last few years, providing data for those who wish to run any kind of research project or study based on certain species or based on a certain location, on a state, or and also migration data. The last scientific papers that were launched on bird migration were based on Wikiavis. These cases include the bacurau and the gavião bobachinha that used Wikiavis data for this research. So all of this information is here. Each user will have their own profile and they can publish. And here is where you have all of your records. And for this user, it is as if it were a sticker album. If you want to have a new species in your list, sometimes you have to travel to take a picture. And this is where all of the users' records are. So when you publish this picture in on Wikiavis, it is as if it were a sticker album, a sticker book. And you end up helping the scientists that are working in this area. So our goal is to be closer to our users with tools and apps, using AI to make our life easier. All tools that I see in this area are heading towards this sense, to add more technology, and Wikiavis is not different. So I'm available for any questions. Thank you. Thank you, Reinaldo. Very good to see this wonderful work of Wikiavis and all the history behind it. It's a Brazilian initiative. And now I want to invite Professor and researcher Sarita Walvali. She's researcher of the Brazilian Institute of Technology and Science, postgraduates with IBIT in Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, researcher from CNPq, coordinate a program of citizen science and innovation, and the platform being developed by IBIT. So Sarita, I thank you for accepting this invitation to participate. And at this moment, it is essential to strengthen this network of Brazilian citizen scientists. So you have the floor. Good afternoon. So I started sharing my screen. Please confirm me if it's all right. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here and congratulate this initiative, something that we were really missing here in Brazil. Also, I want to congratulate the University of São Paulo for the initiative to host this. In the university, we know that due to the difficult times we're living, it's very good to have this opportunity. So I want to bring you a presentation that explains the research program on open science and citizen science that I coordinate in IBICT, that has the participation of masters and doctorate students in our university, and also to talk about the initiative that IBICT is promoting now, that I believe that really adds to some of the concerns and some of the initiatives that we have here. IBICT, just to give you more context for those who do not know, it's an institute that is connected to the Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation. It's a research institute, but also providing services in the area of scientific information. And we have a graduate program on innovation science developed in partnership with the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, where I teach. So I want to show you, we have a group with different people, but I want to highlight the participation of Luana Rocha, who has been working with me in the studies, in this cooperation with IBICT in designing the platform. Andre Apple, also a researcher associated to IBICT, also working with informational governance. And Thiago Braga, who is the technology and computer coordinator. And this is where we are hosting this initiative of the platform. He coordinates this team exactly, but highlighting that IBICT has different areas and that may play an important role in the initiative due to this work with data, with open access. Our point of view to think of the question of infrastructure and governance, we think of this infrastructure from the point of view of social studies, science, and technology. Thinking of one of the actors that has most contributed, thinking about this infrastructure for science and technology, but specifically information science, Susan Starr, that will highlight that infrastructure is not only a substract, it's not transparent, it's not neutral, that is given, that makes things happen, but it's also a substance, a relational concept involving emotions and actions that will transform it and use it. So Starr will call our attention to the dual and paradoxical nature of infrastructure. It promotes change, but also can serve as a barrier for social changes. At the same time, it must be local, to have a local character that is customizable and flexible, but also must be rigid and standardized at some points, exactly for these issues of interoperability in a globalized world. It's a product, but it's also a process. So it's both shapes social convention institutions and practices, but it's also shaped by these conventions and practices. So from this point of view, we have been studying the issue of informational governance and infrastructure. This is an important concept also that comes from management, but will bring the contribution of information science to think not only of citizen science, but also to thinking about open science in general. So first, let's think what it's citizen science. From the morning, we started delimiting exactly what's the meaning of citizen science. We say that citizen science is something that is not new, that is not recent, that has been here with us since the science began, the study of science began. But we highlight that when this term appears especially in the turn from the 20th century to the 21st century, it carries a number of different meanings. And we must understand this movement as the movement for open science. So it's not something that is created by the movement of open science. It had already been established by different fields, especially in participative methodologies, research production, but will receive new ingredients when, at the first time, it fertilizes this concept of the opening of science, that science is not simply opening in the sense of scientific communities or other communities, but also this greater curiosity, relationship of science with other social segments. Citizen science is also used important areas of open science, such as open access, open infrastructures, hardware, open hardware, and open equipment. This will all be essential in the initiatives of citizen science, especially when we think about the necessary infrastructure for the development of these initiatives. So today we cannot think of citizen science separately from this movement of the opening of science, the opening of data. Now in the afternoon, we were thinking of these principles, opening as much as possible, to close as much as is necessary. So the other important ingredient is that citizen science is characterized by the new technologies and information tools, and they bring opportunities. We have seen the participation of Wikiavis, and without these technologies, and now with new technologies of artificial intelligence, it will reach a new level. So it really opens a broader context for attracting new social actors and also giving more visibility for this knowledge production, but also bring some risks. We are talking about control, privacy, the crimes against our data, and these initiatives that where we have seen in the afternoon, we have all of these concerns so that georeferencing will not violate people's privacy. So this is not a matter of only, we are living in the capitalism where the economy of platforms make it all profitable. So any data structure will need us to think about this risk, will make us think about these risks. Another important element is the resignification of the concept of citizenship. We see that today's citizenship, it's not only a characteristic of participative democracy. We see all the questions that are at stake now in also suffering a crisis of representative democracy, and this is affected by the extension of the concept of citizenship. So we are understanding citizenship as the new agenda of rights, new groups, new actors that produce knowledge, new places of knowledge production that need to be recognized, especially in the society of information science. And finally, we started the event in the morning highlighting the fact that in Brazil we are having 3,200 deaths in one single day. So our agenda today has to do with the challenges of the planetary global crisis and emergencies, but also to think what are the local meanings and differences of this social, environmental, sanitary catastrophes. So these agendas, the emergence of climate change was already characterized as a situation of emergency, but that became more visible with this disaster. So The agendas of these initiatives were already based and mobilized by environmental causes in Brazil. In Brazil, the research shows initiatives, just like initiatives from other parts in the world, we are very much directed to environmental questions, but also social and environmental causes together directed to our sustainability goals. Even this sustainability goals require data, so we believe that citizen science initiatives may contribute to close the gap for us to respond to these goals, be it also to create a collective engagement, a collective intelligence, more engagement of different social actors for this turnaround. This is a turnaround of development models. We need to mobilize different sectors of society. Also, in a sense, as we see that today sustainable development means to prepare, to create resilience, to recover, given all of these emergencies that are here knocking on our doors. So the question that remains is, which citizen science? Usually we ask this question also for the movement for open science, but here more specifically, what citizen science are we talking about? So in the morning, I saw your concern, and we were saying we are not only a crowdsourcing network. So the new big data of science, you had the big data of the building of the atomic bomb involving different scientific teams that had no idea why they were working together. And in the end, they were contributing for the development of the atomic bomb, and they didn't know it. So we do not want citizen science to become large crowdsourcing where people are contributing, but not knowing where the data will be used. So what are the policies and the conditions of use for this knowledge? On the other hand, the answer, especially to these situations of urgency, of complexity, require a large amount of data. So the pragmatic access is important, but it needs to be productive, safeguarded by a number of protocols that have to do with this that we call informational governance. So it is connected with the idea of a more democratic perspective. Today we talked about co-production, co-creation, other prefer data justice, cognitive justice, to expand the number of actors that are also producers of knowledge and information for science, but for the well-being, for social and environmental well-being of populations in general. So the question is, for whom? For whom do we create a citizen science? What is being counted? What is being accounted for? What is being recognized? If this contribution will be recognized, and in what conditions, with which protocols? So we believe that that's the direction that the network is going to, and we should not work with a rigid definition of science. The concept of citizen science, just like open science, should be understood as a concept contextualized and located in certain cases. So the citizen science in an advanced country with high education levels, access to devices, technologies, and networks is one thing. The other thing is a situation of a less developed countries, in less wealthy countries, in situations of vulnerability. So today, the English group defends the idea of an extreme citizen science that will then serve these groups that are out of this access, that are out of these areas of higher education, where people would be then more ready to participate in initiatives such as this. It's also contextualized in the sense that depending on the objective of the scope, it will, or the mission, because we also have a mission. We study now citizen science initiatives to respond to COVID in Brazil, and we had a sample of 71 initiatives from a broader perspective of what we understand citizen science to respond to COVID-19, to generate, create knowledge and information to respond to the situation or create solidarity networks to respond to this large humanitarian and sanitary crisis. So, but if we think of citizen science to measure the quality of water or to face the issue of floods or to observe birds, the infrastructures, the requirements or the concepts will be different. So we can see that today, citizen science, as we understand, involves different types of infrastructure, the more classical infrastructure of data collection, registration, classification, visualization, and geo-visualization of data for analysis, but also censoring, be it passive or active censoring. We saw the example of monitoring the quality of water, and then the open hardware is extremely important. If we see the experiences of citizen science in the Amazon and the project that we developed in Ubatuba, you need low-cost artifacts that local populations, sometimes traditional communities, can use to measure the quality of water, the quality of air. We also understand that the makers communities that come from other traditions, from the free software, they're also part of the scope of citizen science for the prototyping, manufacturing of open and social technologies. We understand that this is also part of the scope of citizen science.
The more traditional thing of sharing computer infrastructures is a lot used by major international projects as well as the infrastructures that are necessary for participatory methodologies in research. What Driver said, that the right to research, not only those that are called scientists, but in the perspective of citizen science, all have a possibility of endeavoring any type of investigation with their surroundings, with their practical knowledge. All of that should be valued and require specific structures and tools for citizen science. So thinking on the idea of what would be informational governance, a lot was mentioned in the previous presentation this afternoon. Let's start from bottom up. First thing is the idea that research data and protocols should be transparent, should be visible for those taking part of initiatives. It should be explicit. They have to know what are the protocols adopted, what are the authority regimes, is there curatorship or not, what are the decision-making channels of what to decide what will be made of this data, what are the regimes for intellectual property. We know, and we have people in the group, one PhD dissertation that was just published about intellectual property of data, which is an emerging topic in the area of law and licenses for data and data sets. The issue of informed consent, this is something that comes before citizen science, but it's becoming more important. And the idea of data sovereignty, not only the state, but the communities, especially when we talk about traditional communities, the uses we want to authorize or not for this data and this knowledge that are being made available. There are issue of ethics and privacy, the recognition of contributions, and here there is, and there will be a roundtable in the SPPC, how scientific communication should be made, how citizen science should be reflected in new forms of scientific communication, sharing benefits and open infrastructures. This is not a specific from citizen science. This is a major front for the movement of open science in general, in the issue of open access to scientific journals, fair principle. The concept of open source is being disputed. The so-called golden pathway and what is currently considered, in fact, to maintain this other pathway would be that would be the diamond pathway, that on top of the goat. And the principles, the fair that were explained in the previous presentation. How can we do all of that? How can we respond to these protocols in our initiatives for citizen science? We will see that these systems and this information on governance regimes, we cannot say that they are oppose to each other. They should be complementary. It is important. It's important to have a volume of data, but it's also important that this is associated to data activism, data justice, especially when we talk about artificial intelligence. We know that artificial intelligence can be highly racist, misogynist, and so on and so forth. So big data is important. There's no way to escape that. We are in the edge of e-science, but we have to know the quality of data that comes from the actors, players that do not have a proper scientific background, but have a deep knowledge that is highly important when we think on citizen science. And it goes top down and bottom up. There are many initiatives that start from provocations in research projects or public policies, but also has to be associated to bottom up. Bottom up should be covered as well, covered in the policies and receive and have access to infrastructures. It has to be a fast science because we know that it's fruit of accumulation of data. We know that the response to the vaccines that were created in precedent speed are fruit of accumulated knowledge. This fast response is only possible with citizen science, but it's also important to keep the slow science, the science of hearing, the science of living in a certain territory and understanding the knowledge that is part of a specific time in the major dialogue of science. And finally, something that is extremely challenging is thinking the more formal authority regimes for scientific validation and a possibility of acknowledging the community knowledge or ecology knowledge. When we study the disasters, initiatives that start as movements of resistance and resilience, these more formal regimes are hard to be reached. So this is a major challenge, how to make compatible this epistemic sets of knowledge that are so different. Angelo, I think, yes, I would ask you to conclude. Well, talking about EBICTI initiative, I'm not from the part of the hardware and informatics, but we are contributing in the design of this initiative of a platform that wants to be, well, the idea is do what EBICT did and is doing in terms of infrastructure for open journals. We created an infrastructure to have decentralized incentives for science journals. Now we are getting also in the part of data repository to create a platform that can serve as a major infrastructure that will be an umbrella for citizen science initiatives that cannot create their own, can't afford to create their own initiatives. So we have a policy of data for this type of data. Things that were mentioned in the morning, that good part of these initiatives are they are short-term initiatives. And how can we make these efforts, how can we maintain these efforts, prevent them to be lost? We are carrying out a series of studies about other existing platforms for other countries. What are the protocols to send data, to access data? What resources and functionalities? Are they grouped or not? Are they clustered data or not? Involving the issue of privacy. So this is a major survey in like host platforms like SciStarter in US, where they have data management. Is a very interesting initiative. It's a major library. Clean air is in Europe. We also have some initiatives. Chile, the Fundación de Ciencia Ciudadana. In Brazil, as mentioned, the CDBR. And I believe we can go in for the detail in the debates. I'm sorry that I went. Thank you, Sarita. Well, we will have an important discussion, several aspects to be considered, but it's already 3 p.m. So I will leave the questions for the next moment. We will have some minutes for a break to have a water or something. And when we come back, we will have an open debate with the participation of all panelists, and obviously open to receive questions from the audience. So if you have questions, send through the chat or through the YouTube chat, and we will consolidate them and present them to the table. So with that, we conclude the table for a while. We will have a break and resume with the afternoon debate. Thank you.
Grande número de perguntas.
And we see a good number of questions, and I will ask the audience if they have new questions, they can leave them in the chat. Some comments talk about projects we have here in Brazil. And I would like to take this opportunity and the experience of major portals with many projects like WikiAvis, one with a more specific focus, and a project for development, as they put. I would like to seize this opportunity because it seems to have different paths. Which observation would you have for someone who is starting a project in citizen science that wants to incorporate technology by using internet and information technology so they can collect, for instance, observations? So what would be the pathway? Start a new portal, their own product from scratch, or should they try to address a major project, a portal with projects that is ready to be used. So these are two different pathways, and I would like to ask from you which pathway to follow. So going to, according to our order, if Kate could initiate, then we pass the floor to the other speakers. Kate?
Yes. I would say that overall, technology development developing a platform is very expensive, and it takes a lot of cost, not just to build it in the first place, but also to maintain it and to provide support to all the people who need to use it. In my case, we're very fortunate in that we've got institutional funding for the work that we do. But overall, I would suggest that if somebody has a new project, if their project can be supported by an existing platform, or if an existing platform can make a few modifications to support that project, I would suggest doing that. For example, to write another platform into a grant so that they can support your project rather than trying to build a new platform from scratch.
I completely agree with what Kate said. Building a new platform should be your last resort. You should exhaust all other possibilities first.
Rinaldo? Você já seguiu
Rinaldo?
caminho? Imagino que você já...
You followed a different, you followed a path, you know. Well, I'm sorry because there's some noise here. Well, my suggestion would be, well, depends a lot on the type of project that the person wants to develop. If this is a project with a potential to receive a great amount of data, it changes the perspective of what is the technology to adopt. So if it is a project with less data, for instance, occurrence of a very rare animal, very specific, I don't need that much technology. It's not like bird watching. If you have a major volume, and also it depends on the cutoff. For instance, I just want to study this and that species in the state of Rio de Janeiro. This is very restricted. If it is something that is open for the whole world, if you can have the engagement of people from wherever, this is a major product, involves a lot of money to maintain the infrastructure, to maintain the software. It needs people working specifically on that, which is a complicator when you increase your scale. So it depends a lot on the type of the project. As I work specifically with technology, dimensioning the size of the project depends a lot on your objective. But the first thing to be done is talking to someone in IT with experience in that for a consultancy and define the right path. And try to develop a partnership, for instance, with Inaturalist or Anecdata. Inaturalist, you can segment or filter according to country and or according to species. So you can have a specific project, a part of them, but complying with their requirements. There are many paths that could be followed, depends on the type of project.
Sarita, vocês estão começando
Sarita, you are just starting. So what is the path you are following? Well, first of all, answering directly, it was very well answered. Reinaldo as Reinaldo defined it, depends a lot on the scope. Major data infrastructure, we suppose that all the projects in citizen science has to be like that, and it's not true. But you will need definitely some type of structure, but it not necessarily has to be something so structured and so big and so expensive. There are many tools and tutorials. The platforms that I showed in the end, many of them, they have interesting materials that can be assessed. But there's always this issue, where to deposit data? This is one of the major doubts. And that's why there's a lot of cooperation between, for instance, many of those initiatives that happen out of formal institutional environments like universities. But there are partners, there are individuals, there are partners on these initiatives. And with that, you put together varied expertises, which is very interesting, having people from different backgrounds, some more technical, some that are in the field dealing with very focused things. In our case, it's a little bit different because IBICTI is an institution, well, and every teaching research institutes are living a drama of lack of resources, and we are affected. We cannot say that anyone is not in the situation. And IBICT has a very aggressive attitude for reaching new sources of funds, but we have a structure, be it from previous learnings, be it from the infrastructure itself. Of course, we need to raise funds. We have to go this in parallel with fundraising, but the idea is making easier for small initiatives. For instance, the case of journals, they could have a place to have an incubator sort of thing for a while. And within this infrastructure that IBICTI is making available. Another path is, well, the IBICT itself is not creating anything from scratch. We are learning a lot, especially in this open source, open code resources that we can recreate, we can adapt. So that's why it's very interesting to have open source structures, because then they could be used in other initiatives as well. Perfect. I will pigtail from that, from what Sarita mentioned. As we are here in a round table about data technology in citizen science, this somehow relates to open source technology and open data. So I would like to have your vision, and let's do it in the same order. How do your platforms, or the platforms are developed or are developing, how do they position, what is their position in terms of open code for those responsible for the system? If it is opened, if it is based on this principle that has to be used, reused, and adapt, and what about licenses that you have, both for data as for the source code? Kate?
Yeah, as of right now, the Anecdata platform is not open source, although this summer we were beginning an initiative into building some data analysis tools, which will be open source, and we're actually looking forward to building some of these tools in collaboration with other outside groups, so that these tools can be used not just on Anecdata, but outside. As to data licensing, that's actually a very interesting question, because as of right now, all data on Anecdata is licensed under a Creative Commons attribution license, meaning that you have to give credit to the person who shared the observation in the first place. However, I actually have a meeting coming up in a couple hours where we're going to be exploring how to integrate other kinds of licenses, including licenses that cover, for example, indigenous knowledge. Because as it turns out, not one license does not necessarily cover the needs of all of all projects and all kinds of data that are gathered through citizen science.
Carrie?
So the Inaturalist software for the web, the API, the iOS app, the Android app, and the Seek app is almost entirely open source and available on GitHub. I can't remember the exact license it's distributed under, but you can see that on GitHub. When it comes to the content shared by the community on Inaturalist, there are 3 different types of content that can each have their own license. So we have one license for the observation record itself, which is the facts of what, when, and where, and any description you associate with that. Then the second type is any images shared in association with those observations. And third is sound. And you can choose either the same license for all of those or different license. By default, we recommend that people use the Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial license. And so most of our content has that license. There are a number of records, photos, and sounds that do not have a license associated with them, which means they are all rights reserved. We're hoping to move more of the content to being under Creative Commons licenses because of the standardization that provides.
Reinaldo?
Então, no caso do Wikiavis...
Reinaldo, where in the case of Wikiavis is not open source code, is closed. In the case of data, it varies. For example, photos, they have all rights reserved to the authors. In the case of text and the internet websites, these are all Creative Commons license. In the case of data, the metadata, then they are provided specifically for the study of a certain scientist. In the case, we ask that the data is not shared among scientists. Whenever someone needs, we ask them to ask for the updated data. There are a great number of corrections, and to make sure that they have the most updated version, we ask them not to share data outside our website. But the license in the case is specific for the use of that project. So each part of the website, well, most of the rights are reserved for the authors. There's protection warnings asking people not to copy, but we know that they copy. But the data itself is something that we share with those who are curious, so those who are interested. Karen? Well, we see one question and a number of different possibilities and a number of different treatments of data. In the end, I mentioned that we are studying the platforms, and one aspect has to do with data treatment, because you have intellectual property rights, including copyrights, for example, in the case of images, and this is relatively well established, although we have controversies. In terms of the data, as I told you, this is an emerging question. It's not well established yet. So you have all this discussion that you do not establish copyright on the data, but on the set of data, on the work, on the creation that you do when you collect a set of data. Kate mentioned the traditional populations, the indigenous property, because you have this line there that is called, there is a specific name, I think it's sui generis rights, such as something as specific rights. So also the observation by Carrie about something, the Creative Commons being commercial, non-commercial license. So in the absence of well-established property rights, the Creative Commons licenses are the most used. These are the ways in which you use to attribute the authorship of something. But in the movement of open science, there's a huge controversy about if the commercial rights should or not be an instrument of open science. So I think that in Brazil, we held a study, we conducted a study, not with open science platform managers, but editors. There's a lack of knowledge there, and this is a front where the network should offer training at workshop, in webinars, and in debates. And the second point is that we need transparency. In our studies, not always do we find in the platform the information of what's the data policy of the platform. In some cases, we only know when we send a questionnaire or when we ask for an interview, but it's not obvious what are the policies about data treatment. So the first step is to give transparency, to have a minimum choice of those who are going to use the platform. Great. Yes, I think there's important front there for the network to debate and discuss. Now I want to join 3 questions. Natalia, Blondi, and Fernando ask questions, and they all touch on a topic called data quality. Mechanisms of quality control, issues about links with other data sources, if we have or we do not have this link, and of course, protocols in themselves that will guide the quality data efforts. Now I want to change the order. Let's start with Sarita, and then we go the other way around about these platforms and these projects of citizen science. Sarita, you have the floor. Well, the treatment is also very different depending on the objectives, the scope, the use of how linked the initiative is with scientific projects, initiatives. I don't know, Reinaldo can also, he said that they are using AI for some kind of quality control, but there are some initiatives that are not that close to scientific research, and they don't have all of this concern for such a rigid curatorship. So there are studies showing that citizen science initiatives do not have a problem of data quality, as many problems as any other traditional scientific project. They also have problems, you know? So in spite of being a challenge, again, it depends on the type of use of data that you want to use, how you want to use the data. This can become a problem or not. And there are in the scientific data repository, there are efforts of curatorship. So we cannot disconnect the initiatives of citizen science from other trends of open science. There must be mutual learning here. But I wouldn't know what to say because we have not finished our research, how much these platforms curate or not for that data quality. This is an information that it's not always present in the platforms. So this is a question that would require deeper research. But this is a point. As I said, there is a discussion about what I call a more formal authority. What would you require from a more formal authority? If you are too rigorous, it will decrease the amount of cooperation because you cannot allow for very formal curatorship to keep us from having this abundant participation. This participation brings a risk, and I think that it's worth running this risk. Reinaldo, you have already been mentioned, so go on. The part of curatorship is the more complex part, in my opinion. You have all the technological part, the human part of bringing all of this work of data curatorship. This is very complex. It's a huge effort, especially because of the volume of data that is coming into the platform. In Wikiavis, and I have already answered this in the chat, someone asked this question. The first thing is that we run AI on the data to check if there is any inconsistency or incoherence. If, for example, if there are no birds in the photo, if no birds are found in the photos, the photo is sent to the moderators to be evaluated. After, this photo may be published, and then you have the verification of the species, if the species is correct. If the person chose the correct species in this identification. This verification is done jointly in Wikiavis by anyone can collaborate, suggesting an identification of a certain photo. And then you have a weighing system. So the suggestions of the users are weighed according to how many users have suggested for the species. If it's a user that is used to identify, they collaborate more frequently, they have a higher weight as well. But a user that has just registered will have a weight number 1. So all pictures identified with weight 1. More experienced users, when they do not agree with this identification, automatically the photo does not go to another species, but it's no longer considered a record. It disappears from the maps, it disappears from the description of that species, but it's there in the website. So there is that kind of record. This bird was seen in this place, in the date and time. So all of this information, the species that I'm photographing, this all accompanies that picture. If the species was questioned, then you'd lose 3 pillars of that registration. It's not a full registration. This collaboration is done by users themselves. So sometimes there are conflicts because one user interferes in the picture of the other. But the final objective is the quality of the information inside the website. And the user can invite a friend to give their suggestions, or they can complain on Facebook. So there's a whole work there of the community around these records to discuss if that photo is of that species or not. And in third place, if we don't have consensus or the photo is not identified, some criteria, for example, it's not a Brazilian species. When we cannot identify, the moderator can interfere and remove the photo. But then you have several levels to try to do this curatorship. And we hope that with AI tools, as soon as they are ready, all the species are being reviewed. We have 97% of the species reviewed to train the AI tool, that we can run all of these records in the site and to find the records that are suspect of being correct. So the idea is to get 3.5 million pictures, to scan all of them, and to have a small number of 100 or 200,000 that are suspicious, where we suspect that they are not correct, according to the AI. And then on these records, when we have like a greater screening. So there's a long effort. It's complex. Every day we have problems with identifications and corrections. And I want to tell Sarita that the main problem is not technology. You know, the main problem of citizen science platform is the human problem to do the screening. Can I just ask one thing to Reinaldo? Reinaldo, is it all voluntary work? Or do you have professional teams? Because you are an independent organization, right? from what I understand. Yes, yes. In the case of WikiAv, it's all voluntary work, including myself. We are not for profit. We are not for profit organization. It's been 12 years that we have done this work. And maybe there's a moment when it's impossible not to have a link with a research agency where we can channel all of this data and bring resources to the website, something that may help us to grow even more, and expand. In the technology area, it's a work, 100% of the work is made by me. Not only programming, but also infrastructure, except for AI, because then I have the support of Brazilian guys, Brazilians based in Germany. They work with that and they are helping to do the AI. And we have huge expectations. In my opinion, will be the best tool to identify Brazilian birds. Will be our WikiAvis, I'm sorry. Fantastic. I really believe that from now on, after this project is here with us and all of these partnerships that people are proposing to you, I think that from this network you will receive. Kerry, how does Inaturalist deal with this issue of data, and how do you work for quality of data?
Thanks. So there's a lot of similarities with what Reynaldo mentioned about WikiAves. So I'll just focus on the differences that I heard from the description of how WikiAves works. On Inaturalist, there is not a reputation system. It's very egalitarian when it comes to identifications, which means that if you create an account today, your weight, the identifications that you add carry the same weight as the identifications of anyone else on the platform. We have experimented a little bit with some kind of reputation system based on activity on Inaturalist, but we're not there yet. So down the road, that may be something that we explore, but for the time being, it's just everyone is equal on Inaturalist. The other distinction is that we're not using any AI in terms of checking data. The place where we use AI right now is just in the suggesting of identifications, but there's still a human making a decision among the suggestions. Sometimes sometimes we give them suggestions that are geographically inappropriate from the AI, and we're taking some steps. We're sort of in the process right now of improving that considerably so that we won't suggest a New Zealand endemic plant if you've made an observation in Brazil, for example. But a person has made a decision. This is an identification that seems appropriate, and I'm going to post it to Inaturalist. So I think those are the two biggest differences I heard in how we approach the curation and review of identifications on Inaturalist. There's one more thing, I'm not sure exactly how it works on WikiAves, but if there is a disagreement, and two people add different identifications to one observation, what happens is that we'll go up the tree of life and we'll say, what is the common ancestor of those two species? And then the observation will sit at the identification of the common ancestor until the community agrees, at least 2/3 in agreement about the identification, and then it will be the identification will advance.
Kate, e no Anecdata, como vocês lidam com essa questão?
Yeah, so Anecdata is somewhat different from WikiAves and from Inaturalist in that it's a home to multiple different projects that can have very different types of data that they are gathering. So what we do, well, first of all, we try to provide project administrators with the tools that they need so that they can do their own curation of data sets. So for example, if somebody runs a project on Anecdata, they have the ability to edit, to correct and to delete observations that are either have a mistake in them or that have inappropriate content completely that just needs to go. We also provide tools for communication with the people who are participating in projects and who are sharing their observations so that we can ask them questions about their observation. And we also have content reporting tools, much like what there is on social media. So you can say, for example, you can click a button and report an observation as having something inappropriate about it. Additionally, we also provide tools to limit who can participate in a project. So we have we can have the open model for projects where anybody can participate. And we also have a semi-open model where people can request to participate. And thirdly, we have a model where only approved people can participate and nobody new can join. So so really it's a very different it's a very different problem with a lot of our projects, where a lot of the projects are actually very locally based. They're based around, for example, a certain community or a certain stretch of coastline. And in cases like this, it's really much more about training volunteers who are sharing data and controlling who participates.
Great, obrigado. Eu queria trazer agora uma pergunta de Eduardo.
Okay, thank you. Now a question from Eduardo that I think it's more related to Inaturalist and Anecdata, but also may involve Wikiavis. He says, how difficult it is to carry out small changes in this platform so that the tool may also work with projects of more refined data. So they mention a project, so birds that have rings on them, and they have interest of adding data from different platforms. So is it possible to have these changes in considering project specificities? Or is it possible to think of integrations as they put so that they can interoperate or integrate data? What do you think, Kate?
Yeah, in terms of making project data interoperable, well, first of all, in terms of making modifying the platform to support a slightly different kind of data, that's something that we do quite a lot. I've actually found myself a few times now chatting on Anecdata with a project administrator, and they ask me a question, and I think, well, there's something that we can do. And so I make a quick change and it just happens, which is pretty cool. That's we have a very, we can have a very quick turnaround time in terms of development on this platform. However, when it comes to, when it comes to actually making data on Anecdata integrate with external platforms, that's something that we have not done yet. And that's something it's a very interesting question because so much of the data that we have on Anecdata is of a different, is of different data schemas. And so something that I would be really interested to see is how can we standardize the protocols that we're collecting data with, so that all the different platforms can actually agree on how to basically what does the data look like, so that we can share it back and forth between different platforms, because otherwise we're comparing apples and oranges potentially, and that's a big risk with this kind of thing. So what I'd like to see is coming up with better schemas for interchanging these data, and also developing common protocols for collecting the data in the first place. I hope that answers at least part of your question.
Carrie?
So with the example of a project that's interested in birds that have been ringed, I can explain how that could work in iNaturalist. If you have a project where what you are most interested in recording is a species was here in this place at this time, and some additional data about that particular observation, then iNaturalist is probably a good fit. We have something that can be used in the context of projects in iNaturalist called observation fields. And so there could be, I'm sure there is already, an observation field to indicate whether or not a bird was ringed, and to enter the information from the ring if that is available. And so then you can choose to export the set of observations from that project with that additional observation field data. There are thousands of different kinds of observation fields that have been created now. It's a little bit, it's totally untamed and wild. So it's not one of our controlled fields, but we've created that flexibility around this pretty strict core of evidence, what, when, and where. I think, the one other thing I wanted to mention is that something that the iNaturalist is not designed to do is checklist style stuff. So if you want to have a checklist and have people go out and say, these are the 10 species I'm looking for, and record how many they found of each species, iNaturalist is not a good fit for that, because we don't have, as part of our data structure, that additional structure of sampling effort that you really need for a checklist to be able to infer absence. So that's a circumstance where iNaturalist is probably not the best tool for that kind of biodiversity recording.
Reinaldo, qual é as possibilidades? Você já teve
Reinaldo, what are the possibilities? Have people ever asked you? I'm sorry, I could not understand the question. When you have some specific questions, in the case Eduardo mentioned ringed birds, for example, identification rings, if this information can be inserted there, or if were there any demands for this kind of specificity, how do you deal with these specificities? Well, in case of the specific demands, we have demands to, for example, query data about a certain species. I'm sorry, I did not understand what he said. But anyway, Eduardo already asked me for this kind of specificity, ring birds. We don't have this option yet. I hope we'll have very soon. But especially when we receive requests of improvements.
Not a function of citizen science, but for usability of the site, filters, and improve in their research. What people ask quite often, and I was not possible to respond, was a bird migration map. We've had a research, and there are amazing ones, maps that show perfectly the migration Butantan Institute had recently published a paper showing the migration of Bacurau and crossing with other data. But without that, we cannot expose it in a tool that is elegant for the user. And that's what we are seeking. We are trying to answer to the demand, because I'm the only one treating data here, and I become a bottleneck for that. I'm trying to counter that. Bacurau is Nyctidromus albicollis. Sarita, the integration of data between platforms, is it an important requirement? Not only in terms of the platform for citizen science. In this process of digitalization or datafication, the safer process is decentralizing, and having data as decentralized as possible is the safest way. But this is an old bottleneck. Interoperability is an old bottleneck, not only in terms of technology, but the metadata set. This is also a very important issue, to have this interoperability between platforms or among platforms. We should go, or the network, at least in Brazil, will help a lot, having a group thinking these matters. But I don't think that this is the domaining bottleneck. This is a single issue. Well, we are getting close to the end, but I would like to seize the opportunity to make a question that is probably related to the panel, which has to do with financing and investment. Many mentioned the cost of investment, the cost of maintaining a platform, the cost of a computer infrastructure. Reynaldo called the attention in case of major projects with many observations and occurrences, and now they have a demand of running this on artificial intelligence that will demand even more resources. So a question for all: how do you see those who had a project financed? How was the financing? Or if it was volunteer, how much of volunteer energy was necessary to have? And how do you see the future in terms of financial sustainability of your projects? Sarita, you can start. Well, in Brazil, we have a very difficult scenario. Research and science are being cut, even the more traditional recognized as under a serious threat. So, needless to say, for alternative science sources that want science that are out of mainstream, like Serra Pilheira, Fundação Boticário, they declared they don't have space to open special calls right now. In other countries, we see, because there are specific policies for citizen science, we have white papers in citizen science. There is already recognition. In Brazil, we still have a long way to go. That said, and we have always to seek for new sources, making visible, proving the importance. I believe that collaborative efforts, not only sharing infrastructure, but sharing expertise, we shouldn't compete. We have to engage in the most synergistic possible process, learning from each other, having everything open as much as possible. This is very important to make things feasible here. But open science in a more traditional way is already gaining some space in fostering agencies, in grant agencies. We saw this morning that FAPESP, the agency in the state of São Paulo, is already opening some space for citizen science. So the importance is that, giving visibility and creating cooperation. Reynaldo, your project goes through a completely different path. How is your financing history? Well, I would almost start to burst in tears here because we started in the first 2 years with no financing or whatsoever, but my own financing. But it started to grow, and at a certain stage, I had to say, well, it's not possible to finance everything. It is more than my rent. So I have to ask for help. And currently, Wikiavis is maintained through donations. The user, we have a session for contributions. You can have pay an annual fee or monthly fee or T-shirts, and even for propaganda advertising in the site is not that much that we can cover with advertising. So basically, we survive with donation. This is the difficulty. So what sustains Wikiavis is mostly the collaboration of the users, their donations. There's no institution, organism, company, government, no one sponsoring us, but the users. And I work basically with volunteers. If we had some sort of financing, surely we would have IT professionals, biologists. My dream is having a biologist paid to help me in the website. And I wouldn't have to do that. I would have a biologist just for this service. I intend to diversify the fundraising through the website, but so far what worked was user contributions, user donations. And as this is a private website, we don't have an NGO Wikiavis. It would be nice to have, but we don't. And part of it also hinders the access to finance and having relationship with other institutions.
Carrie?
I think diversification of funding sources is really key. I think around the world, we see that governments are under financing investments in science in particular. Inaturalist is a joint initiative of the California Academy of Sciences, which is a public museum and nonprofit, and the National Geographic Society in Washington, D.C., which is also a nonprofit. So Inaturalist receives a large portion of its operations supported through those two institutions. And additionally, we have grants primarily from foundations. We've received very little funding from the U.S. government, almost none. So we really haven't been supported through the sort of traditional scientific government-supported grants. We do also receive donations from the community, and we're hoping to grow that as a source of income for Inaturalist over time. There are 8 full-time Inaturalist staff and 1 contractor, and we had well over 1 million people using Inaturalist last year. So given the size of Inaturalist, it's an extremely small team. And if Inaturalist is going to continue to grow, we need to find the resources to be able to sustainably support that growth. An additional important source of funding has been in-kind contributions from major technology partners. So we've received different kinds of in-kind support from Amazon, Google, and Microsoft.
Kate?
Yes, so Anecdata, our funding situation is, well, we diversify as well. A big chunk of our funding, well, our team, first of all, I should say our team is quite small. I am the only developer for the entire Anecdata platform, both the online database, the website, and the mobile apps. And we've got 4 other people who are working on Anecdata part-time, just in a support role. And we have to diversify our funding. Some of our funding simply comes from my laboratory's general fund because Anecdata supports some of the work that we do at the laboratory for our own projects. We also get some funding from foundation and federal grants. Again, this is all primarily so that we can carry out projects using the platform. But as we found, people like to give you money to build something, but they don't necessarily want to give you money to keep it running once you've built it. So that is the constant challenge. That is the constant challenge when operating a platform like this. So we're always keeping our eye out for new foundation grant opportunities and ways that we can collaborate with other outside organizations so that we can keep on running Anecdata in the future. And also, Anecdata itself is secure, but I would really like to see more funding so that we can build out what we already have.
Great. Ótimo. Eu queria
Excellent. I would like to take this opportunity. We are getting close to the end of our discussion session, and I would like to pose a question by Ron Nielsen about data use. In your understanding and the platforms that you coordinate, data are used by scientists. How do you have a feedback, and how do scientists use data? And citizens, do citizens use data as well? And what difference do you observe when a common citizen is using? Is not only then they are no longer just a supplier of data, but also a consumer and a scientist. And what is the impact in the way they use the portals? Kate, you can go first, if you please.
I'm sorry, can you restate the question?
Eu vou repetir em português.
I will repeat in Portuguese. Are you receiving the translation? Well, the use of data by the platforms for both common citizen and scientists. Do you see a difference in the profile of use of this data? And how do you differentiate the use of data by a citizen, a common citizen, and by a scientist? And how does this impact the platform?
Okay, yeah. Honestly, we don't always have a good understanding of who is using our data. That's actually a problem that we run into. For some of our projects, what we actually find is that the scientists are actually reaching out to us and asking to download the data, and they actually have needed to be directed to where they can actually download the data. But what we've found overall is that most citizens are not using the entire data sets for their own purposes. Most citizens are more interested in data in terms of they're more interested in the emotional impact of data. For example, if there's data on a sea turtle that was entangled in marine debris, people have a very close emotional impact with that sea turtle. But people don't necessarily, we have not been finding that citizens themselves necessarily are using the data directly. And that's one thing that we should, that we actually would like to get better metrics on in the future is who is actually accessing our data and what are they using it for? Because that's something we don't have metrics on as of right now.
Carrie?
Yeah, so when it comes to everyday people using Inaturalist, I think we've created a lot of tools for exploration, particularly on the website, to a lesser extent in the mobile apps. I don't think I explicitly mentioned that you can do a lot more with the Inaturalist website than you can with the mobile app. So if you've only explored the mobile app, do also explore the website. But essentially, Inaturalist is sort of a virtual dynamic field guide. And so, especially as people are contributing more observations, you can use it to look around and say, you know, in this state or in this park, what are all of the species that people have found? And when you get enough data, you can say, what are the species that people have found in March? Or what are all the plants that people have observed in March? When people use it that way, I mean, I think we don't usually find out about that except, you know, through web traffic. And I think another sort of not necessarily strictly scientific use of the data from Inaturalist is in advocacy, in terms of advocacy for protected areas. Like for a park, maybe let's say the area is already protected, but a municipality is trying to decide, are we going to turn this park into soccer fields or are we going to protect the forest? And this is where Inaturalist can be a useful tool. If you get people out there to have a BioBlitz, make a lot of observations, then it gives you something you can take to the municipality, to the governing bodies and say, look, this should be protected because of all of the species that live here. In terms of scientific uses of the data, range extensions are are really common on Inaturalist. They happen all the time. Something pops up in an unexpected place and gets confirmed. Similarly, invasive species detection, Inaturalist is increasingly being watched by different local and national organizations charged with detecting and responding to new invasive species. And in general, species distribution modeling. A growing category of application is computer vision research, since Inaturalist is a very large source of in general, pretty well identified photos, and we've used it to train our own computer vision model. We've made some data sets available, and those are being used in that scientific community as well. We do need better feedback to the community when their observations have been cited as part of a data set in a publication. I will put a link in the chat to all of the papers that have been published so far that use Inaturalist data through GBIF, so people can explore that.
Reinaldo, como foi sua experiência, né? Você comenta também dessa toda a equipe de voluntariado, mas também de alguns.
Reinaldo, what was your experience, if you can comment, the use by volunteers and by scientists? Well, difference between data use by citizen scientists and scientist citizens is very different. In the case of bird watchers contributing with the site, they aim to identify the best spots for bird watching and have a larger, in between quotes, productivity in terms of new species observed that we call the lifers. Spots with a greater potential to identify new species in their own catalogs. Scientists, they usually have their own research project, and they want a cutoff of the informations in the site that are related to their own publication, their own papers. There are issues related to behavior. For instance, I mentioned already migration, that is, and the expansion for new areas. Always the going south of some species. There is a trend of a record more to the south or more to the north, or new species that is observed in a new place of occurrence. So new information to science. Bird watchers, they want to officialize their entries in the bird observation, in the bird watching. So they get to the field and they can easily identify and spot the species and be able to identify the species in their logs. So very different uses actually for these two audiences. And the demands are in the sense of using for these two ends. And that's it. Thank you, very interesting. Sarita, do you have any consideration? Well, this is exactly my impressions. Luana Rocha, that I mentioned, is also taking part in the event. Her master dissertation was about that. How do scientists see citizen science? And I ran a research in Curricula Lattice, and most of the projects in citizen science are extension. That type of researcher that already work with this type of approach. More traditional scientists they do not trust that much. They are reluctant with open data. So there is this work of establishing this dialogue. And as Carrie called the attention, there is an activism that also wants to have data in hand so they can do advocacy in specific struggles. In Brazil, it's less established. United States has a history that is much stronger on this type of activism, but it is starting to grow here. And I believe we have this to function, but statistically, I don't know. Kate mentioned that this is something, this metric we lack. And it would be interesting to have this study of the user, something very old in the science of information, to know who is using data and what for. Well, I believe this was an excellent roundtable, a lot, very complementary, different standpoints, and this will enrich a lot the discussions within the Brazilian network of citizen science. So I would like to thank each of our guests for their time, for their availability, for their explanations. And I remember to all of those who are following our meeting, we are closing the debate this afternoon, but we reconvene tomorrow morning with another roundtable. So I now open the floor to our speakers for their final remarks. Kate, you have the floor.
Well, I think what should I say? Looking forward, I would really like to see more improved standards for interchanging data in between citizen science platforms, and also for improved standards for describing citizen science projects. There's been some work done in terms of exchanging these data. For example, with SciStarter.org, they've done some good work, and we've done some work sharing our project data about our projects with them. But the data interchange standards, just in my experience, just aren't really there yet. So I would really like to see more work happen there. Additionally, I'd really like to see better standards for interchanging the actual observation data in between platforms. I guess that's about it. Thank you all so much for having me here, and it's been really interesting hearing what all the other panelists have had to say as well.
Obrigado, Kate. Carrie, suas palavras finais.
Thank you, Carrie. You have the floor for your final remarks.
Thanks. So again, I'm going to say something very similar to Kate. For citizen science overall, globally, I would love to see the development of more data standards that facilitate the sharing of different kinds of data. I mentioned in my presentation that I think that biodiversity occurrence records have had an advantage because of the role that conversations about standards have played over the last couple of decades, and specifically the creation of the Global Biodiversity Information Facility and the way that that provides a third-party way to exchange and share data so that it's not strictly necessary for data to be shared directly between two platforms if there is a third-party independent entity. And I think that there's a lot of other important realms of citizen science around air and water in particular that could really benefit from having this kind of external body that is international in scope and provides that structure. My other closing thought is that we would love to have a formal relationship with Brazilian institutions as part of the Inaturalist network. I've had some initial conversations with folks from Instituto Chico Mendes, and I hope that some of you are out there in the audience. But I look forward to watching the Inaturalist community in Brazil grow and being able to facilitate that. Thank you.
Obrigado, Carrie. Reinaldo, suas palavras finais.
Thank you, Carrie. Reynaldo, your final remarks. I also thank the invitation. Very fruitful afternoon, high-level debate, and I'm available if you want to call me anytime. Count on me. And if you have further questions, you can send through social media or to my email. Thank you. Thank you, Reynaldo. Sarita, final words. Well, once again, it was a learning, and I see that as a future opening in front of us, and I see this with very good eyes. It is very important to maintain this flexibility on the types of approaches for citizen science, especially countries as Brazil, with the diversity of agendas, of contests, situations. I believe that citizen science is not cosmetic. It is a way to face the dramatic challenges we have. And I think that it's a paramount instrument that should be mobilized with different objectives, in different fronts.
Então, obrigado a todos. Obrigado a todos.
Thank you very much to everyone that was together with us so far. We close our event for today. And tomorrow morning, we reconvene with a new roundtable. So have a nice afternoon and thank you very much.